Labour ministers have been suspended from the party after offering to help a lobbying firm influence policy in return for cash. Stephen Byers, Patricia Hewitt and Jeff Hoon were secretly filmed by a documentary team. The Conservative leader, David Cameron, said the Prime Minister should rethink his decision not to hold a government inquiry.
Suspended from the Labour Party for wanting to trade their political contacts for cash. Stephen Byers was secretly filmed saying he was like a cab for hire, and now he, Jeff Hoon and Patricia Hewitt have been suspended from the parliamentary party. It's toe curling, but was it rule breaking?
I'm a bit like a sort of cab for hire, I suppose.
The three former ministers insist not, and the parliamentary watchdog will investigate. Mr Byers was filmed saying he had changed government policy, but that's been strongly denied by ministers. This morning, David Cameron said those assurances weren't enough and called for an inquiry into the alleged actions of ministers and officials.
Ministers are saying different things. Stephen Byers says he didn't lobby Lord Adonis. Lord Adonis said he did. Stephen Byers said he called Peter Mandelson and got regulations changed. Lord Mandelson says he didn't.
A Tory MP, John Butterfield, was also caught out by the investigation and will be probed by the Standards Commissioner. But today, Mr Cameron was criticised for not being tough enough.
He, I notice, has not suspended the Tory MP who was featured in last night's film. And I think that the best remark I can make about Mr Cameron is that people in glass houses should not throw stones.
In a room along this House of Commons corridor last night, a livid Labour Party met to discuss Jeff Hoon, Stephen Byers and Patricia Hewitt. The mood was angry and incredulous that three of their own could have got caught up in a sting like this. And it's prompted all the main parties again to promise reform to the murky world of political lobbying. Today, the Tories said they would strengthen the scrutiny of ex-ministers taking jobs outside Parliament. Labour have promised a new statutory code of conduct.
Westminster is sinking into corruption and hypocrisy. Corruption at the heart of the Labour Party. These are senior ex-Labour ministers who are now hawking themselves for hire, and hypocrisy from the Conservative Party, who blocked our moves to stop lobbying taking over at Westminster.
Scandals about standards in public life dogged the dying days of the last Conservative government. Labour and this Parliament are suffering too. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, meanwhile, the BBC has found that more than 20 MPs have broken parliamentary rules by not declaring foreign trips they received free of charge. Between them, the MPs breached the Code of Conduct on more than 400 occasions. Our Home editor, Mark Easton, has more.
Every year, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of hospitality is spent by overseas governments on British MPs travelling around the world. While such visits to destinations such as the Maldives, Cyprus and the Caribbean are regarded as useful for fact-finding, there's a strict code to ensure no one can accuse members of accepting foreign hospitality in return for political favours. The BBC investigation has found widespread abuse of those rules, 400 breaches involving more than 20 politicians. Today, the Conservative leader David Cameron said the parliamentary authorities should pursue every case.
There are clear rules, but they appear not to have been adhered to. Clearly, the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner must get to the bottom of what's happened in every case, and we must look at the penalties that apply when rules like this are broken.
It is a long time since the UK last gave them a grant, and it's time we gave them another one.
The list of those who breached the rules include Labour MP Andrew Dismore, who's a member of the Commons Committee which polices the regulations. Following annual trips to Cyprus, he failed to declare his interest on more than 90 occasions. He denies any wrongdoing. Shadow Defence Secretary Liam Fox has admitted breaking the rules twice and will be writing to the Parliamentary Registrar to make this clear. He broke the regulations amidst 5 visits to Sri Lanka paid for by the Sri Lankan government. Liberal Democrat MP Norman Baker, who's campaigned to clean up politics, has admitted 37 breaches of the code following trips to India. He tabled motions and asked questions about Tibet following trips funded by a Tibet lobby group and the Tibetan government in exile.
They felt that the rules were not there to be strictly observed. They thought it was okay. And they haven't really yet got the message that these days the public expects rules to be observed and that the informal culture of past decades has to go.
This afternoon, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority has hinted that it would be prepared to broaden its remit to cover more than MPs' expenses. The calls for greater oversight of MPs' behaviour are growing louder. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Let's pick up on that point then with our political correspondent Laura Kuensberg, who's at Westminster for us. And neither of these stories really playing well for confidence in our MPs and all this on the eve of a budget and general election.
Well, that's right. The timing could hardly be worse, Kate, just at the time when the parties are almost on the point of pushing the button on their election campaigns. Yet again, we have another bruising 48 hours or so for the reputation of this whole place. I think Labour, though, have reason to be particularly sore about the revelations of the last couple of days. Labour MPs are furious with what they have learned about 3 former ministers making promises of turning their contacts into cash as they were caught up in that undercover sting. There was a pretty angry meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party in Westminster last night where that was pretty widely on show. And these weren't just any Labour MPs, they were 3 people who held very senior positions in government for many years. So no surprise that some of their former colleagues are quite so furious with them. Now this lunchtime the Labour Party has tried to reflect a little bit of the flak onto the Conservatives, questioning why Sir John Butterfill, one of the Conservative MPs who was caught up in this sting, has not yet been thrown out of the Conservative Party. David Cameron says there's not much point doing that now as we're so close to a general election, although he has made it very clear that Sir John cannot expect a nice comfortable seat in the House of Lords after the general election. But the reality is that compared to the Labour names who've been caught up in all of this, that the Conservatives are on slightly safer ground here. Labour MPs are very angry about what's happened indeed. None of this, and including the allegations about foreign trips, does the reputation of any MP any favours at all.
Laura, thank you. Laura Kuensberg there. Well, the 3-day cabin crew strike by British Airways staff may have ended at midnight, but today there's still widespread disruption with a quarter of British Airways flights at Heathrow cancelled. Other airports across the UK have also been affected, and with another walkout due to start on Saturday and to last 4 days, there's no sign of BA and the union meeting to negotiate